Alright, hello everyone. This is Zenzi with Zenzi Podfic. Today we are doing an MHA, or My Hero Academia, fanfic. This fanfic has 1,216 words, one chapter, and it is called Local Century-Old Man Has Two-Sided Beef with a Child by Moth. Summary: who the fuck would have beef with a child? All for one would. Alright. Let's get into it. Alright. Buying All Might merchandise wasn't exactly a common practice for All for One. On occasion, he'd pass by a window and either spot a particularly annoying pose or slogan and purchase the offender to burn at a later date. Or find one or two things with nice colors or interesting composition, which would end up tucked away in a carefully hidden glass cabinet in an undetermined location. It was a form of advanced hating, he claimed, to the belief of nobody. The store he was currently perusing through had a rather limited selection of options to enter his well-used fire pit, but still enough to stall him for enough time for a small child to totter over to the same shelves, eyes unfathomably wide. All for One thought he looked quite puntable. Of course, he made the logical decision to ignore the child and continue with his selecting process. It was only once he finally made his choice of item, reaching out for the admittedly well-designed figurine, that the issue arose. A chubby hand burst out of thin air in a manner reminiscent of a scene from a horror film, snatching the item before retreating back to the child's side. The villain stood aghast, staring blankly at the empty shelf in front of him. After a brief moment of processing, he turned to stare at the child. The child shamelessly stared back, eyes innocent in the face of unbridled malice. All for One watched as the boy blinked once, twice, a third time for luck, before strutting off as if he hadn't angered the closest thing the world had to a god. Whilst the child may have been clutching an All Might figure, All for One was left to hold naught but a bitter, bitter grudge. Now, the logical thing to do in this situation would be to back off, to shake his hand in rage and simply move on with his life. Of course, All for One didn't even consider this option before calmly walking out the store, pausing just outside to lean against the wall. After a few minutes, the child exited the shop, figurine safely stored away in a paper bag. He began to pass by the opening on an alleyway, only to be pulled by his hood into it. His legs dangled dangerously in the air as he was brought up to his assailant's eye level. He stared owlishly at the man, a small frown forming on his face. Does it feel good to use your young age to deprive good citizens of local merchandise? You snozzed, you lost, weirdo, the boy replied, deadpan. So sorry about the voice. In the moment All for One took to process the insult, the child made the wise decision to promptly kick him with all his 4-year-old strength directly between his legs. The villain dramatically collapsed to the floor in a surprisingly human reaction for a man over the age of 100, and tears would have come to his eyes if he weren't in the possession of a quirk designed to stop the embarrassment of such an automatic response. Now, A logical child would have stopped there, task accomplished, danger escaped. Midoriya was more vengeful than the typical kid. He kicked the man whilst he was down, multiple times at that. Midoriya returned home with his spoils, the figurine, the figure, most of the money All For One had on him, and, additionally, his tie, with glee. All For One was found by Kurogiri in hospital near death. When questioned on his state, the criminal claimed to have battled All Might himself. Kurogiri didn't know All Might was the sort of person to leave rather crude drawings on his defeated villains, but who else could have possibly dealt that level of damage? All For One spent a lot of money on birdseed. The unfortunate setback of creating any amount of Nomu was feeding them. One would think, since they had once been human, that they'd be able to eat normal food that the villain already had around his evil lair. But, alas, even that was too much to ask for a poor old man. The store he was currently in was quite lacking in variety, but he lacked both the time and energy to care. Shrugging, he picked up a couple of large bags, turning to the side to check out. It was then he spotted the child, browsing through the decorated tape section of the aisle. Was none other than Midoriya. All For One had done a brief background check on the child who'd brutally attacked him prior, hence his knowledge of the boy's name. And usually he would have done something in retaliation. The issue lay in the fact that the boy's mother was worryingly familiar, with lack of better phrasing, meaning there was a non-zero chance that Midoriya was his son. This, of course, didn't change the fact that he was more than willing to get into a minor scrap with a kid. He wasn't that ethical. He wasn't avoiding the 8-year-old child, he told himself as he crept away silently, using several quirks to mask any sound. He was simply refusing to contribute to the prolific sound pollution. Unfortunately, the criminal had severely misjudged the speed of children, and in his efforts to escape unscathed, he tripped over the child, who'd somehow ended up directly behind him. The criminal landed pathetically on the floor, leaving him in the perfect position for Midoriya, who'd now taken note of his existence to kick him in the shin. All For One opened his mouth involuntarily to let out a pained sound, only to be instantly winded by multiple kicks swiftly delivered to his ribs. 7 minutes later, Midoriya carefully deposited 4 washi tapes on the cashier's counter, unscathed. All For One was subtly dragged into one of Kurogiri's portals. A worrying amount of child-sized bite marks littered over his incapacitated body. Midoriya was having quite a nice time, all things considered. Previously, going out with Mitsuki and Katsuki was loud, violent, and often explosive. Ever since Katsuki mysteriously returned home with a fresh bite mark and an injured ego, however, he'd been somewhat muted in his aggression. Currently trailing a safe distance behind Mitsuki and Midoriya, he was the first to notice the suspicious figure gaping wordlessly, unmoving, in a manner not dissimilar to a deer in rather toothy headlights. Midoriya looked up, finally spotting the man who could be described as his arch-nemesis. All For One had time to point a single accusing finger at the 10-year-old before being lunged at with fury rivaling an agitated honey badger. A single tear left his eye as he mourned his uninjured state. 15 minutes later, Mitsuki intervened, slowly prying the rage-filled child off of the grown man, reduced to a weeping mess. An impressive feat considering the man's tear prevention quirk. Sorry, she grimaced, offering an insincere smile. He bites. As soon as All for One awoke again, he promptly left the country. He liked the weather in Iceland better anyway. All Might only discovered what happened to his didn't get the chance to be arch nemesis when Midoriya applied for UA, gifted with the security footage for completing his teacher training. I love this fic so, so much. I love all of Moth's works. They are amazing. You should definitely check out the author in the description. I will make sure to leave a link. As usual, sorry for any and all background noise. I actually had to re-record this one because the first one had way too much background sounds in it for me to even edit out at all. Sorry. Right, head over to the fic, give them kudos. Let me know what you think in the comments. I had super fun with this, and I hope you did too. Bye!